Welcome. I'm Caroline Peyton. As you can see, I'm a nutritionist and naturopath, and I specialise in gut health. And so my presentation tonight is all about the gut microbiome and why your health really does start in the gut. Just a little bit about me. I've been in practice for over 12 years now. I trained as a nutritional therapist, added on naturopathy. And as I said, I do specialise in gut health. I have a lot of clients that come to me to get relief from all sorts of digestive complaints, from whether it's diagnosed as IBS or whatever it might be, to things not to get relief, but to help with things like inflammatory bowel disease. And I also see a number of clients who have hormonal health conditions as well. And a bit of background, I'm not a youngster anymore. I've got 20 years in corporate management before my 12 years in naturopathic practice. And I really am passionate about helping people and sharing information with people to really lead better, healthier lives. So this is all about the gut microbiome. This slide doesn't correctly represent the gut microbiota. That bit in the middle, you could say, is the small intestines, but this big tube around the outside is the large intestine, the colon, and that really is home to most of our bacteria. So, things you might not know, a few facts about the gut microbiome. It is estimated, we are still learning so much about this, but it's estimated we have 100 trillion microbes in our gut that are 10 times the cells in our body. We have more microbes in the gut than there are people in the world. It's a home to a lot of things. It weighs 1 to 2 kilos. Oops. We probably have about 160 different species each, but there have been about 1,000 different species identified, and a lot of this comes back to things I'll come on to talk about, to do with our genetic inheritance and where we live in the world, etc., and diet that can influence this. Now, something that's really important and has been very relevant in the 2 years of COVID is the fact 70% of our immunity does start in our gut. We're home to lymphatic tissue called Peyer's patches that produce white blood cells. The gut mucosal lining produces an antibody called secretory IgA. Antibodies help to go in and neutralize pathogens that are passing through the gut. It's the same antibody in the gut as in the respiratory mucosal lining as well. We have a thing called intestinal permeability, when the gut mucosal barrier can become weak, and it can allow toxicity and pathogens to pass through from the gut and into the bloodstream and start to have an impact on other parts of the body. And we have a thing called Th1, Th2 balance. That's to do with our T cells. So for some people, if we can get conditions that get out of balance, it can come back to what might be going on in the gut first of all. And we now know that 90% of disease can be linked to gut health, and I'll talk about some of the conditions that can be linked to this. And because of all of this that we now know, it is starting to be recognised as another organ in the body. So yes, we found a new organ in the body. So what exactly is the gut microbiome? Well, we have this diverse number of microorganisms. It's not just bacteria. We have viruses, we have fungus, we even have parasites. And actually, all of these can live symbiotically together. Yes, even parasites, some of those are now considered to have what we call a symbiotic relationship in the gut, that they're actually mutually beneficial to one another. And even some viruses and even some fungus. We may have heard of candida, and at one time everyone used to think they had a candida overgrowth, and that's certainly not what I see very often when I do stool testing with clients. So fungus can be fine. It's when things get out of balance, and as I said there, sometimes we can get chaos occurring, and whoops, this chaos is what we refer to more specifically as dysbiosis. It's an imbalance between good bacteria and other types of virus and parasites and fungi, and bad pathogens. And we can start to see, particularly when we do stool testing, the overgrowth of pathogens that can start to flourish and not necessarily overtake, but get this things that get out of balance. And you might wonder, why on earth I put a diagram of car park up there? But it's an analogy that was explained to me that I really, really like. And if we think about the gut barrier as car parking spaces, we want every single car parking space to be full, and they will be full of something. But we want as many of them as possible to be full of the beneficial, the commensal bacteria. But when things get out of balance and this dysbiosis pattern occurs, we can start to get a creeping intake of pathogenic bacteria filling up those car parking spaces, crowding out beneficial bacteria. And that's where problems can start to occur. It's when I'm working with clients, we're trying to get things back into balance. And when this dysbiotic picture starts to occur, that's what can contribute to ill health, chronic conditions, and digestive problems can start to occur. So your microbiome really is as unique as you are. We know we're all unique. No two people are the same. We could all eat identical diets, but some of us may start to get ill health, or other things may start to occur. And so we are all unique, and the microbiome is just the same. And some of the things that contribute to this microbiome differentiation, if you like, are all these things. So we inherit from our parents sort of part of the microbiome picture. Birth and early childhood exposure. When we come through the birth canal, we are exposed to microbes. Might not sound very nice, but it's just a fact. And in fact, the company I use for gut microbiome testing also have a vaginal microbiome test in their toolkit. And one of the things we're learning more and more about is the gut interaction with other microbe communities in the body. So we know we've got gut skin microbiome, the gut mouth, and certainly between the gut and the vagina and the gut urinary channel, we know there are different microbial communities living there. So when the baby passes through the birth canal, it is starting to be exposed to bacteria in a good way, hopefully in a good way. Otherwise, because a baby's born sterile. Breastfeeding as well, there's microbes on the nipples, so we get exposed to microbes there. Early childhood exposure, you know, this sterile environment that we think we should expose babies and small children to isn't actually healthy. When we were growing up, you know, we'd be playing outside, you'd be playing in the dirt. We weren't using Dettol wipes to wipe everything down all the time. And having this interaction with bacteria is very, very important at a very early age to start to create this gut microbial community. Medications can have an impact, and I'm sure many of you will know about antibiotic use because they are antibacteria, antibiotics. They immediately have an impact on the very, very delicate gut microbiome community, but other medications do as well. Stress has an impact, and our lifestyle overall can have an impact, and diet, because the higher sugar, processed foods, high fat diet starts to really change the composition of gut microbes. And if it's low fiber, that also does too. So, you know, what we do from prior to us being born, our parents, to our early childhood exposure, through our lifestyle, with all these things I mentioned, always have an interaction on what's going on in the gut. Now, this is just a little bit of a slide to sort of really show the growth in research that's taking place in understanding the gut and the microbial community. This isn't even just all the research. This is ones that have been printed, articles that have been printed in the field of human gastrointestinal microbiome. You might wonder why it drops off 2021. I can only assume that is something to do with COVID during that time, because there's no way it went from, I can't see the figure at the top. Actually, the number at the top is 1,100 and oops. Have I just gone backwards or forwards? Oh, I've got to go back. One moment. I've just jumped on. There we go. Yeah, the number at the top is 1,132 articles in 2020. It didn't drop off a cliff. I'm sure if we look now, it would be much higher again. But you can see the dramatic increase in the last 10 years in this area of research. We have learned so much, but I think what we know today is still a minute amount of what we'll continue to learn going forwards. So dysbiosis, that imbalance of gut bacteria, what has it been linked to? And this is where we start to learn about the impact on our health. So we now know from some of these research studies that, you know, the healthy gut or an imbalanced gut or dysbiosis, there is a link to mental health, from depression and anxiety to things like ADHD. For example, ADHD in children, they've noted that children with ADHD are far more likely to have digestive symptoms, for example. Obviously, it's not surprising that there's a direct gut link here, whether it's IBS, SIBO. SIBO actually stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. This is when bacteria start to translocate and start to thrive in the small intestines. Yes, we have some there, but we shouldn't have much. And some clients who start to get chronic bloating, cramping, discomfort, pain, not necessarily SIBO, but it could start to form a pattern of bacteria being in the wrong place, thriving in the wrong place. And inflammatory bowel diseases like Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, even thinking about bowel cancer, we need to start come back and looking at what's going on with the gut microbiota. Inflammation around the body, partly because, as I said, intestinal permeability, also known as leaky gut, coming from the gut. If you've got pathogenic bacteria, they give off toxicity, and that can pass into the bloodstream. And this can create heightened inflammation around the body. Of course, that's not the only reason for inflammation, but it's part of the picture. And actually, many, many people are living with what we call low-grade inflammation. You may not be aware of it, but many, many conditions are linked to inflammatory conditions and low-grade inflammation. Chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia has a link. Hormone irregularities, like the menopause and PCOS. Autoimmune conditions, you know, it's a massive one, actually. We do say autoimmune conditions start in the gut, and it went back to that Th1, Th2 thing I talked about earlier. Skin conditions, we think about acne and eczema and just dry skin and itchy skin and psoriasis is an autoimmune condition. And things from brain fog, obesity. Yes, people with obesity, it's not all their fault, because there's been shown to have a different gut microbial composition for people with obesity. Diabetes, and I've just put recovery from infections like COVID, because if you've got poor immunity, which 70% stems from the gut, it may hinder your recovery from infections. So how on earth does the gut influence hormone regulation? So I'll try and keep this fairly simple, but it's just sort of to try and give a bit of a picture. So we talk about the gut microbiome, but there's a new word that's circulating now called the estrobolome. Can't even pronounce it very well. But it's an aggregate of microbes, a particular population of microbes in the gut, whose products help to metabolize estrogen. Now, this sort of goes on to this next point that I make. What do gut bacteria do? Well, certain pathogenic bacteria can deconjugate estrogen. So let me just explain. Estrogen is broken down and comes through the liver. We don't want to hold on to all of our old estrogen. We want to make sure that estrogen is processed, metabolized, and we get rid of the old estrogen. And we want to make sure it goes down what we call the correct pathways. Some estrogen is more toxic than other types of estrogen, and it goes into the gut from the liver. And we want most of that to be excreted from the body. However, some bacteria have been found to what we call deconjugate that estrogen in the gut. Basically, it breaks it apart and it allows this old estrogen to recirculate back into the bloodstream, which we don't want to happen. It breaks free, gets back into the bloodstream, and then it's circulating again. And this can have an impact on things like PCOS. It won't necessarily help menopausal symptoms, even though you might think we want to be hanging on to whatever estrogen we've got. It just upsets the pattern and the balance of what's going on with our natural estrogen. We want to be producing estrogen, and we want to be able to get rid of estrogen, the older estrogen, when it's no longer required. So it's this term estrobolome, this population that help to effectively metabolize estrogen. But then if we get pathogenic bacteria, certain strains can just break apart this estrogen, and some of it can end up circulating back into the bloodstream again. So there are certain foods that support the gut and have a specific role in helping, for what I've just explained, this hormonal support. I don't know if we can see this because of our faces down the left-hand side, but certainly on mine. But fermented soya. So when I talk about fermented soya, these are things like natto, tempeh. They're fermented soya. So it's a little bit different to soya in yogurt or soya in milk, or even tofu. Tofu isn't actually a fermented soya. And when it's fermented, it means it contains bacteria. And what it can do is it can beneficially convert this compound called daidzein in soya to activate its phytoestrogenic properties. Now, phytoestrogens, I don't know if that's a word that your members are familiar with, but what it means is it's compounds that latch onto estrogen receptors in the body, and they exert a gentle estrogenic effect. And these can work in two ways. For ladies going through the menopause who are lacking estrogen, by this gentle estrogenic effect on our estrogen receptors, it can just help to provide a little bit of estrogen support. For other people who are younger and maybe have what I call estrogen dominant type symptoms, which can be endometriosis or PCOS, we want to actually put something that has a very gentle estrogenic effect onto those cell receptors to stop the more harmful estrogen coming through. So it actually does work in two ways when we think about phytoestrogens. Flax seeds, they are actually a phytoestrogen, but within the gut, they contain something called ligands, and they can do one of these things. They can bind to extra estrogen in the gut to help that excretion that we were just talking about, the older estrogen. And of course, flax seeds is one of the foods that's rich in fiber, helping to feed the good bacteria. And these three things, types of foods I mentioned at the bottom here, cruciferous vegetables, those are your things like your dark green leafy vegetables, cauliflower, and apples, particularly stewed apple, mentioned that on another slide, and citrus fruit contain this compound, calcium D-glucarate, which helps to stop that deconjugation that I talked about in the gut. So just some foods there that have this very specific gut property, which in turn can help to manage and provide a little bit of hormonal support. So more generally, how can we love our gut? What do we need to do? Well, I can't talk enough when I'm talking to my own clients and with my own communities about a plant-based, fiber-rich diet. And this plant-based fiber-rich diet needs to have this really, really wide diversity and abundance of vegetables. We should be, in an ideal world, eating 40 different plant foods every week, which sounds like, oh my God, how do I do that? And ideally 10 a day. And most of it should come from vegetables with just a little bit of fruit. There tends to be this focus on 5 a day, fruit and vegetables, But if we're not careful, we're adding in too many fruits, which are lovely because they've got a nice sweet taste, but we don't want to be putting in too many very sugary fruits into our diet. They upset our blood sugar balance. So wide diversity of vegetables, as much color, you know, thinking about the rainbow, whether it's beetroot, carrots, butternut squash, obviously the broccoli, the cauliflower, the mushrooms, you get the drift, you're getting lots of different colors. But I really encourage people to go to the supermarket and have a look at what's on the shelves and try and pick things that you wouldn't normally eat. We're all creatures of habit. I'm no different to anybody else, and we all tend to pick up the same foods. And I just encourage people to go out and get something different, because all these different fibrous foods work in slightly different ways and feed different types of bacteria. Here I talk about stewed apple. Research to show that stewed apple, obviously sugar-free, and I love to do it with cinnamon because that creates a lovely flavor, and cinnamon itself is very anti-inflammatory food. So stewed apple contains pectin. Pectin helps to feed it acts like a prebiotic food, which feeds gut bacteria and has a very anti-inflammatory effect in the gut. You know, some people don't realize it, but there can be an element of inflammation going on in the gut, and that can be driving problems with digestive symptoms, gut symptoms, or obviously creeping systemically around the body. So stewed apple is just a lovely thing you can make. You can keep it in the fridge. You can eat a couple of spoonfuls a day. Really nice thing to do. Now, prebiotic foods, as I mentioned, this is different to probiotics. We've all heard of probiotics because those are the beneficial bacteria. But what we really need to be focusing on all the time is making sure we've got a diet that's rich in foods that feed those beneficial bacteria. Our lovely berries, all the different types of berries are wonderful for that. They're rich in a compound called polyphenols. Pomegranate, fennel, lentils, garlic and chickpeas are just few of those prebiotic foods. But if you're focusing on what I said above about a wide diversity of vegetables in the diet, then you're going to be getting some of those prebiotic foods in the diet. And fermented foods is a lovely way to have a gentle effect on the gut. I do stress to people that fermented foods aren't going to have a very strong therapeutic effect, i.e. if things are very out of balance, you're not going to miraculously get things back in balance just by adding in some fermented foods, but it can really, really help to keep things in balance. We've gone from historically eating fermented foods when we didn't have fridges and we would ferment some of our foods to not eating them at all. So I've just listed some there: kimchi, sauerkraut, kefir. I'd focus personally more on goat's milk kefir than dairy cow's milk kefir. But, you know, kefir is another thing. Some people have these and they really do notice the difference in their gut health. So they should be part of what we should be eating more often. And, you know, if we're going to love our gut and we really want to try and manage pathogenic bacteria or try and stop an overgrowth of pathogenic bacteria, we really need to keep the diet very low in sugars, processed foods, and an excess of saturated fat. This isn't to say that you can't ever have these things. No one's perfect. I like to think of everybody having, you know, in a Pareto 80-20 rule where, you know, we're focusing on the diversity of vegetables. But of course, we're going to have times when we have a bit of sugar in our diet and, you know, you're going to eat some meat. That's not a problem. I focus on the plant-based diet because that doesn't mean it has to be vegan, it has to be vegetarian. If you do like meat and you think you thrive better on meat, and some people do, in my view, then it's fine to have some good quality meat and other things like oily fish, but you've got to keep the vegetable intake up as well. So if you were curious to understand about what's going in your gut, I mentioned about stool testing. There's only one test I use that I think is the best on the market. I've done a lot of research on this. It is using DNA technology. to really accurately look at what is going on in the microbes. You no longer need to collect loads of poo and do this type of test. It doesn't need much at all, and it provides a very, very accurate picture. Actually gives 72 markers. It looks at the gut health, from inflammation to immunity to intestinal permeability, looks at digestive capability, it looks at the gut immunity, and then about 60 markers looking at all different types of the commensal essential bacteria, to looking at probably about 40 different types of pathogenic bacteria that we often carry, and parasites and yeast like candida, and some more highly pathogenic bacteria strains as well. So just a little bit about working with me. Obviously, I work with individuals, personalised programs. I take in-depth case history with individual clients, looking at each client's individual unique needs and symptoms and what the triggers are. It's all about getting to the root cause of symptoms and problems, and all my advice and protocols are tailor-made to the individual. I can provide an expert analysis and interpretation of functional tests. You may be able to go online, you may be able to get a £99 test to look at the gut, but first of all, as not providing the accurate picture or nearly as in-depth, but it's also not interpreting the results based on your symptoms, because that's what you need to do. And I work with individuals based on their lifestyle and not dramatic, unworkable solutions, and help to keep clients on track. So if anyone's interested in finding out more about me, that's my email address and my website. I do have a Facebook group myself called Inspired Lifestyle Choices for Women Over 35. It's a bit of a mouthful. I have a YouTube channel. I've got over 100 videos on my YouTube channel, and I do have an Instagram page as well. So that's all I have to share. I'll stop sharing now.
Amazing. You were brilliant. Try and talk, Emma. I know, that was so great, Caroline. Thank you.
My pleasure.
That really, I don't think you can stress enough how the individual approach is really important in this, and how that it isn't about some blanket rule for everybody. We can talk about the microbiome as an entirety, like as an organ out there, but when when you're dealing with it within a body and an environment, that's when you start to get all these impacts coming through. So that was brilliant.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks. So hopefully that just gives an overall picture of the importance of it and how we can take care of it, and gives your members some ideas of what they should be focusing on to try and keep it healthy and strong.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. So informative. I've been jotting down things and
frantically
writing.
You
forget, there's so much out there, and because it's so unique to individuals, and because there's so much information out there, you don't know how to tailor it to yourself. And that's why it's really important to speak to the likes of you guys, you, Caroline, because you will tailor it to people. You will understand their background, you will understand their day in life. Yes, saturated fats is not good for you, lots of high sugar is not good for you, but there's still ways to incorporate that into your diet. But it's
got to be workable for individuals at the end of the day. You don't just say, oh, you've got to stop doing X, Y, Z, blah blah blah, because people just go, what, how do I live my life? I've got a wedding coming up and birthday parties, and I'm going on holiday, and it's just like, it's just not achievable for people. So sometimes it's just those little tweaks to the diet that can make 100%. A massive difference.
Yeah 100%. And they have a huge impact. Those little shifts, and people don't realize. I think people don't realize, Caroline, walking around, how rubbish they feel. I don't know if you find this with clients, but until they feel better. Yes. And then they have a little flip back to how they used to behave, and then they go, "Oh my good Lord,
I've gone off stream, and you can help me again." Absolutely,
See, the whole ADHD is a real interest to me. I'm an 80s baby, And obviously things weren't recognised in those days. We were just told that we were naughty, and there will be elements of ADHD in me and all sorts, but it's the diet as well, which really, really interests me, because we're now going into a day and age where we're noticing that adults are being diagnosed with ADHD, and then the anxiety, the gut health, all of that kind of stuff. You sit back and you realise how rubbish you felt for most of your life, ever since you were a child, but it was ignored because unfortunately it wasn't recognised. And it's so important to talk about it,
This whole sort of gut, brain, body, we can't separate one thing out from another. You've got to look at the entirety, really. And everything has to try and get everything back into balance. But it's trying not to overwhelm people. But I think you've got to do everything all in one go. It's trying to keep advice simple for people, just starting by thinking, how can you increase vegetables in your diet? That doesn't mean you have to go vegan or vegetarian, but what can you do to start to add more vegetables in your diet? And like I say, just going to the supermarket or going to a farmer's market and thinking, blimey, I haven't eaten aubergine. When did I last eat aubergine, or something like that? And it's so easy to find recipes online, and they don't have to be complicated. I don't do complicated. I don't have time to do complicated foods.
I don't.
There are ways to keep things simple, and
Amazing. Thank you so much, Caroline.
That's okay, my pleasure. I hope that's been useful. If anybody wants to get in touch, hopefully they've got my details there. I always do free discovery calls with people. I never expect people to sort of sign up and work with me. I always like to have a chat with individuals, understand what their concerns are, and then we take it from there.
Brilliant.
Fabulous.
Okay. Thanks.
Great. All right. Thanks, Caroline.
Bye. Bye.